Well, again, guys, it's good to have you here today. We're doing something different. We did it last week, this week, and for the next 3 weeks, where we are talking with people who are doing things in and around our community and what God is doing through their nonprofit or through their ministry. And the reason that we're doing this is because, as we shared last week, we get to hear all these great stories. We talk about giving here and your giving and what your giving does. We get to hear all these great stories, but you don't get to hear the stories. So we thought we'd take a little break during this time and bring some people on stage and talk about what God is doing in them and through them. And today, I'm really, really excited because I have a good friend that is here with us today. And Cedric, I met a couple of years ago. We're part of something called Carolina Movement, which helps start churches all over the Carolinas. And he was leading worship, and I was super excited to meet him. Then I did a retreat with him. Really have got to know him as a good friend. And so Cedric is planting a church out in Apex, North Carolina, out in the Raleigh area. He's got a wife. He's got 2 kids. He took time out of his schedule to be here with us today. So I'd love for you guys to welcome to the stage Cedric Cobb. So this is probably going to be more like a conversation than it's going to be, because this is like 2 friends getting on stage talking at this point.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Thank you guys for having us today.
Yeah, so what I would love for them to know, because like we could probably go on for hours if we talked about your whole background, but like growing up in church, you're a pastor's kid, and growing up in all of that, though. Like, how did you wind up first getting called and involved, like in ministry and what you were doing?
Yeah, I would say early on, I feel like I was born in church, to be honest with you. I feel like it was Monday through Sunday. My parents are pastors. My grandfather is a church planter. I'm from a little town called Vanceboro, North Carolina, which many would call the sticks. My grandfather was a church planter, a car salesman, and owned a lot of land. How he did all 3, I have no clue. But he had 13 amazing children. One of them happened to be my mother. And so I grew up in that area, population about 800 people. And so when you weren't in the fields farming or having fun or playing ball, or you were going to church. And so my parents were pretty heavy into ministry. So it seemed like for me that was just my experience, my context. It just seemed like we did everything that was involved in ministry. Our family was very well connected in the area and helped a lot of people.
Yeah, so 800 people. There's churches bigger than that, bro. Like, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But so you're doing that, and then as you grow up, though, God just starts using you, and you start moving through different ministries. I want you to talk a little bit about, because you talk to me, we talk about a lot, that you grew up in what he calls it black church.
Call it black church.
And then how you morphed into more of a multicultural model, and
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about that, man.
Yeah. So for me, early on in ministry, my grandfather, like I said, was a church planter. So I went to a church called Chapman's Chapel Baptist Church. And long story short, my mother had a different context, which was more of a charismatic type of movement. And so, to make a very long story short, I grew up in what would be considered just a lot of tambourines, a lot of gospel-style music, a lot of just traditional heritage, I would say, towards the culture. It was very much so like, oh, everybody, clap your hands, just a lot of that. And it was a lot of just singing, a lot of joy, a lot of charisma.
So pause for a second. So you grew up, they were a lot more interactive than we just were.
I would say so. I would say so, yeah, for sure.
Okay, all right, just all right.
I would say they definitely were more expressive in the sense of, I don't know about y'all.
What he's saying, guys, step up your game. That's what he's saying.
I think black people just love music, man. We love music, man. Yeah.
We do too. We just don't move to it.
It's all right. Listen, I love it.
All right. Guys, sorry, I distracted.
No, you're good.
Yeah.
As far as moving into more of a multicultural ethnic experience, I grew up not being taught to look at color as a barrier, if that makes sense, regardless of what I was raised in. I had friends that were white, Hispanic. I speak Spanish. I can sing in Spanish. I've been able to travel and do missions. So for me, it was really, really cool just to know that even though I was raised in that context, I didn't have to feel trapped by that context. So when I went to college, I was able to go experience a couple of different ministries that were a little bit different. I actually moved to Charlotte. My wife and I, we got married. I've known my wife since middle school, by the way. We met in 2002, and I just knew she was my baby during that time.
Yeah, but before that, you went to college and then either got kicked out or you left.
Oh Lord, yeah.
Like,
I was at A&T, North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, and I was partying a little too hard. I had so much fun. I had to withdraw from the university. That's a part of my testimony and my story, man. We were having so much fun. My life was on the line. I'll say it like that. And when I withdrew from the university, I had no clue what was next. And there was a acceptance letter to Fayetteville State University. I went to a historically black college and university. And so that was really, really cool experience for me because it was one of the first times outside of being raised in church that I felt like God showed up for me in a very unique way in the sense of I thought life was over because I withdrew. I wasn't sure how I would get back in. And out of nowhere, this letter that was supposed to come months ago showed up in the mail later on around November of that year, 2006. I'm 36 years old. And so 2006, 2007, I was actually starting at Fayetteville State University. And I was a music educator, communications degree. My wife, who's from Fayetteville, went to East Carolina University. But that was a whole thing, man. I grew up in church, so I made sure that when I went to college, I found out what the world was like. If that makes sense. I was like, I've been around Jesus for a long time. Let's see what Jesus doesn't let me do because I was told all the things I couldn't do. So if I could drink it, I drank it. If I could try it, I tried it. And that was just kind of my experience, man. And for about a year, I wandered, interested in other faiths and things of that nature, Muslim, all the different things. And so for me, I personally had that encounter with the Lord, and that really changed my trajectory, if you will.
So you meet your wife.
Yes.
While you're there.
Yes.
And I want you to share a little bit like what your ministry journey has been since then, because you've done a lot of different things since then.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm an amalgamation of multiple things. I grew up loving music, loving creativity, artistic expression. And so for me, I meet my wife in middle school, 2002, and I said, if I don't get her number, I'm going to regret it. I'm from the country, so we don't ask the woman, we would ask the parents. So I walked up to the mom and dad and was like, hey, I'm interested in talking to your daughter. Can I get your number? And I didn't have an iPhone or anything like that. Track phone was popular during that era. So I got her number. We stayed friends. When I went to college, we decided to date. And during that dating phase, we broke up a couple times. And then we ended up saying, hey, I think this is kind of a thing, because if you love it, you let it go, and it comes back, must be something to it. And so we decided to try again in dating. Nothing bad, just we felt like we weren't on the same vibe at the time. And then we ended up getting married 2013, right after I graduated. Graduated May 2013, proposed on the day I graduated, got married in October, and moved to Charlotte. And I had a friend that would travel and do music. If anybody's familiar with a guy by the name of Eddie James, Eddie James' ministry was pretty popular. He would travel all over the place. And I helped one of his guys who started a group called Marked Music. And so I moved to Charlotte and helped a guy by the name of Jim Noble, who owns King's Kitchen and Roosters. They have a phenomenal ministry.
We're barbecue related here.
Oh,
Noble's
God, yeah.
Smoke.
Noble's, yes, listen.
Yeah.
So I know Jim, Olivia, the family, and for me, that was the introduction into a more multi-ethnic context. And so I learned about Bethel, Jesus culture, all the different sounds and styles, Misty Edwards, all types of Hillsong. I mean, just stuff I would not have known growing up in a Baptist church in a town of 800 people. And that kind of just opened my eyes, honestly, to that there was more to God's expression, man.
So when you were working with Jim Noble, talk a little bit about, because you guys know Noble Smoke. You've probably seen King's Kitchen. Maybe you don't know all that Jim Noble actually does for his community. So talk a little bit about what you did and what he does and those things.
Well, if you don't know anything about Jim, you should try his brisket, and that'll tell you about the man right there. He has phenomenal food. But I came into the area. I lived in Pineville, so Pineville's not too far from here. We had humble beginnings, Willow Ridge Apartments, right down from Buca di Beppo. That's where we spent our first anniversary. I met Jim through our friend Chris. And he does homeless ministry, very, very heavy into helping the homeless in the area. And so one of the things we would do on Sundays is, rather than having what felt like a more traditional service in my context, he would actually invite the homeless in. And in the kitchen, they would be cooking all this food for the homeless, and he would be sharing a message, and we would do worship. I play 15 instruments because you got to find something to do when there's only a population of 800 people, and you had a lot of time on your hands. And so I took that gift with me there, and I started to play guitar and sing. with them there, and Jim would share a word. And on Tuesdays, he would close down the actual restaurant from like 12. This is right on Trade Street. If you know anything about Charlotte, there was King's Kitchen right there on Trade Street. And so, long story short, the name of the church for the time was Restoring Place Church, which was really, really cool. And so they actually did homeless ministry in the sense that if somebody was homeless, he would say, give me a year, I'll give you a job, I'll give you some resources, and we'll help you get back stable on your feet. These were people who had dabbled in things like alcohol and drug addiction specifically. And so I was able to be a part of that for over a year and got to spend time with his amazing daughter, Olivia, and their family. And we just sang and we fed and we taught Bible studies on Tuesday, and he would close down the shop and open it up for the homeless to come in. They would be able to leave with food, and when it was cold outside, he would gather tons of coats and blankets, and we would walk the streets, we'd feed people, and we'd make sure they have a way to be able to rest, and that was really cool.
Yeah, I can't say enough about what he does in the community. If you guys really want to support it, you should go eat at King's Kitchen, because all the profits and proceeds from that go back into funding everything what Cedric was telling us here. So you leave that context.
Yeah.
And then what happens next?
So we go from Charlotte. So the cool thing for me is we're a church plant right now. And so a couple of friends of ours in Atlanta, Georgia, were planting churches. And we said, well, we've been able to help the homeless. Let's go see what it would look like to see something start from the ground up. So we went to Atlanta, Georgia, and we helped two amazing churches, one called Excel Church, a good friend of mine named Mike Darnell, and a church called Rainfire Church, rain and fire at the same time. Very cool. Anyway, it was a really cool church in Douglasville, Georgia. I worked at the CarMax. If you've ever been to Georgia, like right in Norcross area, I worked at CarMax. And my wife worked in the King Queen building you and I talked about, right for the governor's office of consumer protection. So that was our context. And we were in Georgia for a couple of years. And then from Georgia, that's when my wife and I were expecting our daughter, Camille Hallel. She's 9 years old now. And we said, man, we need to move back to Fayetteville, be close to some family with this bundle of joy coming. And so we moved back to Fayetteville. We were in Fayetteville for a little while, and I was not in a ministry role or position at the time. I was working for Prime Communications. It was an AT&T company. And from there, interestingly enough, we moved because a church was interested in hiring me to sing, do worship, and do creative. So I was at a church called Kingdom Builders. They're now called Calvary in Wallace, North Carolina. Wilmington, if you know about Wrightsville Beach and things of that nature. We're right near the water. And then from there, 2015 to about 2017, we were in Wilmington, North Carolina, and then there was a ministry in Denton, Texas, that would love to have had us at the time, and so we felt led to help them. And then from Texas, it keeps on going. From Texas, I moved back. We were just trying to navigate. My wife was homesick. Texas was cool, but we were super far from family, so we went from really close to really far, and we went back home with the family. And we ended up getting a position in Spartanburg, South Carolina, at a church called Hope Church, where I spent about 3 years. And then the pandemic happened. During the pandemic, I moved back to Fayetteville to be closer to my wife's family. And we helped a church plant in Fayetteville called Mark Church with my friend Chris Diller, who was with Eddie James. And then from there, we've started this journey of church planting.
Yeah, so it's a good segue here. So if you guys just heard, I mean, this is a life of like wherever God leads, you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would drive my wife nuts. But anyway, I love hearing that part of your story. Yeah. So now you are planting a church in the Raleigh, Cary, Apex area. I want them to hear, how did that happen? Like, how did that get started? Like, what did God say to you? How did you get to where you're at?
Yeah, very cool, very cool. So just to give you a little bit of context, 2018, 2019, going into that year, I was on staff in South Carolina, and we were doing this thing called a Daniel fast. And Daniel fast is when you take 21 days, fruits, veggies, nuts, things of that nature, no meat. I mean, I was barely breathing at that point in time. It's like, water, Sandy, water. Anyway, I was struggling. I was praying we would do these things inside the actual main like building part, like this part right here. And we get together, kind of take our Bibles out and write some things down. And I'm in the book of Kings, in 2 Kings chapter 4. There's a story about a man who's building, this house, if you will, this place. The prophets were moving. They were like, this place is too small. Let's build something else. And this guy, while he's using this axe in 2 Kings chapter 4, the axe head falls in the water. And basically, he can't get it back. He goes back to the prophet at the time. He's like, man, that was very expensive. It was borrowed. And I started to see that as the story of humanity and how it links to Jesus. And so God gives man an assignment, Adam. He loses his ability to function because of the fall. He can't get it back by himself, right? And so he has to go to the Father. The Father's strategy, just like in this story, was to put a stick in the water. And so God places Jesus in the earth. And that axe head, that authority, that relationship, that covenant that was lost, God brings that back up to the surface. But he doesn't take it out for them. He says, hey, draw that out yourself. And so salvation and walking with the Lord is a decision that as we embrace what he's freely given us, that we begin to experience our purpose surface. I'm like, God, that's interesting. And so the name of our church is called Surface Church. And our vision is to see God's purpose surface in people. And when people come in contact with people like Clay, my brother here, and many of you who have discovered what life is like with Jesus, something on the inside of them should say, man, I'm really interested in what that is that you have. And it's really free for you to have as well. And so that became that story. I talked with my wife, and she was like, And so at the time, it was like she knew, because, again, I've been moving all over the place. Every time we moved, it felt as if God was saying, hey, go help that place. Go help this place. I grew up in a family that just loved helping people. My grandmother was like one of those people who just cooked, loved, served, homeless. It didn't matter. And so I was like, man, I just really feel like we could help people. And that started that journey. Pandemic comes, we helped church plant, and I could not get that same desire from 2019 I heard out of my heart. 2023, we let people know that we were going to be starting Surface Church.
All right, so pause right there. So God tells you something in 2019, and you're sitting with it 2020, 2021, 2022, and then decide to take action 2023.
Absolutely. Crazily enough, I was in St. Louis at a conference with a friend of mine who travels a lot, Alaska, back and forth, named Ryan Hart. And while I'm at this conference, I felt like the Lord said, go ahead and buy the domain. I had been sitting on the name of the church. I was like, well, if this is you, maybe the domain and the social media will be available. And sure enough, Surface Church was available to purchase as a domain. And the social medias, there was no other church that had that name. I think most people think surface level rather than surfacing something rising. And so it's really, really cool to see that was available. Bought the domain, and we kept going.
Yeah, I kind of know what it's like. When we planted a church, I sat with it. Not 4 years, though. That had to, burn inside of you to, get something going.
It definitely was burning on the inside of me, for sure. I think anytime you've seen impact, whether that's missions or traveling up into Nicaragua, Peru, and India, different places like that, anytime you see what the gospel can do in other places, you wonder, well, what can God do here? And so that became our desire. So me and my wife, we, at the time, emptied out our savings, and we relocated to Fuquay, Varina, and then we just started doing these regular gatherings, just once a month, letting people know we were in the city. And now we do gatherings every single Sunday at 4 p.m., and that's been phenomenal.
So you just blew past that right there. You emptied out your savings.
Absolutely.
Why would someone do that?
Yeah, I think for me, I believe personally in risk and sacrifice. I believe in not sacrifice in the sense of in a negative context, I guess I would say most people, they could be consumed by risk, consumed by failure, consumed by doubt. I consider myself a type of Gideon. Even though I would follow God, I would want proof and signs and evidence and what are you saying? But for me personally, I emptied it out because I, one, believe that if God tells me to do something, he'll make up the difference. But in that moment, I knew that we had to get to the area. And sure enough, once we got there, we started to see so many things happen. There was a church we didn't know in the city. I knew nobody in Apex at all. But there was a church there in Cary area, and they felt led to give us $10,000. And it was just no crazy relationship, no, just a guy in the area that had come and sang a few times. They felt led to partner with us. From there, another church, Pastor Nick Newman, Propel Church, they gave us speakers, and we were going to pick up speakers, and he was like, hey, We're celebrating 8 years, and so we want to be a blessing to a church, and your church just happens to be the one that we want to bless. We know you're launching. Here's $8,000. And then another church was like, hey, here's $4,000. Then another church, New Life, here's $3,000. And it just kept happening like that, as if the moment I decided to trust the Lord, the steps that he had already ordered for me became so clear. Even though it looked like I was taking a loss, I was actually initiating the gain that would occur in my life.
Yeah, so pause on that so people can understand, because I've lived this principle out so much in my life. You didn't wait for all the money to come in to step out and do what God asked you to do. You actually gave out all your money. You went backwards financially and then stepped out, and then the money came. Did you guys catch that? Did you hear that? So what would you say? Like, would you do it again?
Absolutely. I'd say one of my favorite things, without going off the rails here, Isaiah 54 talks about a woman who's been barren. And it says, sing, O barren, you who did not break forth. And he goes into this thing about preparing, like, get ready to sing, like, sing to the Lord, rejoice, even though you've been barren. And he's like, stretch out, lengthen your cords, strengthen your stakes, because you're about to have a massive harvest of children, in a sense. And so for me, that felt indicative of God doesn't want you to wait till you see something before you initiate. And so he's like, hey, prepare, because it's coming. And then he says to the person, you won't be put to shame. Like, in the midst of all of this, sometimes we know what it's like to fail, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. The reality is that you can fail forward. You can just because you do something that is a risk doesn't mean success is not involved. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think what I've learned in my life is that failure is actually one of the best teachers in life. Because I can see everybody doing things right, and I can't do that, but I can fail and know I ain't ever doing that again. Like, failure's a good educator. So you're in your church now, and you're kind of in what we call a launch phase. So why don't you explain what your church is doing right now, like who the people are, what you're preparing to do, and what the plans are. I want to share with them.
Man, so we have been doing these weekly gatherings Sundays at 4 p.m. And so right now we've been establishing just community, relationship, culture, getting to know people learning our vision, our desire to see God's purpose surface in people. And then outside of that, making sure that we're building community during the week. We pray together on Wednesdays. We do leader pour to develop leaders on Mondays. And then outside of that, we do Iron Nights, which is our Bible study, where we just go through the Word together. So we have a community that's already forming now, and our heart is to move to morning gatherings in January so that we can actually officially be what we've already been practicing, just in a more traditional context, I would say. Most people come to church in the morning. If you grew up in church, you know that vibe. I know for me, I heard gospel music coming off the radio and just getting prepared to go to church with family. And so a lot of people in our context and even outside of that know that church happens on Sunday, even if they've never been. It's usually in that time. And so we want to move towards mornings, and we're just in that gathering phase of resources, making sure that we have what we need to make sure that the launch is successful, man.
And So explain to you guys who, like, we don't expect you to understand how churches happen. I mean, it's how this one happened. It's how churches all across our state are happening. God will call someone, and it'll be a person or a group of people, and generally call them to an area sometimes where you know nobody, right? Didn't know nobody in Apex. And then God will begin sending people, and then you gather those people together, which is the phase you're in right now. You're trying to gather people together. You've got 30, 40.
Yeah, about 30,
Yeah, 30 or 40 people. And then you try to get that as big as you can get it, and then you will then launch what we would call public on Sunday, what you guys are experiencing right now.
Absolutely.
And this phase is really, really important. We're going to pray for this phase for you in a minute.
Yeah.
Because these people, whether they know it or not, are all the volunteers that you have to have for Sunday. When you guys think you come in here, there is a ton of volunteers that make this happen. And if you don't have anybody, then you really don't have church. So that's kind of where they're at, gathering volunteers and gathering support. Like young churches, they need support to be able to pay rent and do all those phases. Absolutely. So that's what it looks like, and he's in the phase where he's gathering people like right now. So what are some of the, like, you've had some people come in. You've got the one young man that's come in, like, God's radically changed his life.
Oh, man, yeah.
Yeah, can you tell just a couple of those stories?
Yeah, man. One of the things that never gets old for me is to see somebody come in who has either no context to ministry and faith, or to experience someone who has had a context, but it's one that's wounded and hurt and damaged. If you've ever heard of the term church hurt, it's a real thing. And so not only did in the story, 2 Kings, where it talks about the axe head, one of the things I felt like God personally just whispered to me during that time was that there would be many people who feel like they had lost their edge. Like, you've been in ministry, you know what it's like to be a part of church, but you're not really in that same context anymore. And there's a lot of people who have experienced ministry and hurt from it, and has allowed that to become the blanketed context in which they assume all ministries are. And there are ministries like ours where I feel like, hey, you're going to come in contact with us. We're not going to be perfect, because none of us are, but we're going to be in a position where we can facilitate love and community and authenticity to them. And so one of our guys had been hurt in ministry, and for 17 years had battled with just hurt from church. And he said for the first time in 17 years, he was happy to be in the context of ministry again, because it felt real. It felt authentic. It felt as if, he said he felt like he was coming back to life. Like, he would come and serve and help because he does media and tech, but he really didn't want anything to do with the places he was helping. And he said, man, this is the first time that when I serve and when I do things, I don't even get tired. I actually feel energy, because nobody's abusing or robbing from me or manipulating me or lying to me or things of that nature. And so we've seen that. We've seen marriages that were kind of on the fence that have joined, and we've seen them experience healing, therapy, restoration. We've had people that have come in. Sometimes this is kind of a unique, challenging context, because not everybody experiences it, but we've seen people healed. Physically evidenced, documented healing, where somebody's wrist was in a cast, and we just felt led to pray. And while we were praying, he said all the pain was gone, took the cast off, and did everything that his hand couldn't do, that his wrist couldn't do before. And those are always beautiful moments when you see the Lord do something that is just amazing like that. So we've been seeing a lot of people come in and find peace, find forgiveness, find love, and find grace in God.
So as we're kind of ending our time here, I know you have a couple of things that are coming up. You also have kind of a technology need. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing for back to school, and I'll share your technology need that way. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest things for us is that just because we are a newer church or ministry in the area doesn't mean that we don't want to lead and demonstrate forwardly our heart to serve the city. So and even just near and far. So we've done things like Operation Christmas. We've done things like supporting other groups and I would even say organizations in the community, from feeding the homeless to food pantries and things of that nature. But we're doing something now. That's our back to school bash, and we want to feed the teachers at Apex High School, and we want to give about 50 to 100 backpacks full of supplies to Apex Elementary for less fortunate kids. And so that's something we've always committed to doing, is that if somebody is sowing, supporting, giving, if you will, generously into what we're doing, that we wouldn't just hold that money, that we would be generous and demonstrate that in the community, because there's always a need, and you never know who's going to be impacted as a result of your yes. And so for us, that's one of the things we're doing right now is back to school, and we've been able to do things in the community, such as doing those types of contexts. And so just giving generously to that area.
Yeah, I love it. So backpacks, got the lunch.
Yeah, all the supplies for the backpacks too.
Yeah, not just the backpack.
Not
Here
just
you go,
the
kid.
backpack.
Here's the backpack. Hope you can feel it. Cedric is a video media guy as well, and when we were sitting and talking, when his church launches in January, he needs to be able to have a good video presence, and the church was using your personal equipment. And then that equipment now busted. So he's needing to buy some new cameras to be able to do that as well. And so the reason that I bring that up is I want us to be able to take care of that. I really do. And here's how you can help. So if you go ahead and pull out your phone, everybody pull out your phone. You can go ahead, you can. Nobody's going to force you to give, but I'm at least going to tell you to take out your phone. If you go to nextlevelchurch.org, like right now, give you a little bit of time, you can go there. You want to hum a little song? I was kidding. Click the give, and here's what we're going to do. Any money that gets given over the next week, so between today and the other, we're going to earmark all of those dollars. If you click the missions drop down, we as a church, we're going to try to take care of what he's got going on. So we want to be able to give to him. I'd love to see you guys step up and be able to give $3,000. And if you can give $3,000, not you individually, well, if you do it individually, fantastic. But what we want to do as a church is we want to be able to cover some equipment costs. We want to take care of those backpacks. And so every dollar that you give, we're not going to use it. We're going to give it away. You guys did a fantastic job at Easter. Pastor Doug has shared with you. You guys gave a bunch of money. The good and the bad news is we gave all that money away already. And we didn't use a dollar of it. We gave it away to other stuff. So if you can help, if you go to missions and give the money there, we're going to take care of this. If you're a guest with us today, got a super cool thing for you. You can be generous with our money. If you go back to the I'm New Here booth, and you tell them there, we give $25 donations to ministries all of the time. You just tell us where to go. If you walk back and say, hey, I want my $25 donation to go to Cedric. Again, you're not making it. We're going to do it. You can be generous with our money. You can say, hey, give my $25 to Cedric. So those are two ways that you can do that, and I would love for us to be able to walk out and know, man, we've got that taken care of. And when I call my friend next week and say, dude, we got it. We got your back.
Thank you.
And we're going to take care of that.